5,000 years. That is how long this thing has been standing. And in all that time, through the rise and fall of empires, through the invention of the internet, through every single breakthrough in human science, nobody could explain it. Nobody could fully answer the question that every person who has ever stood in front of those stones has whispered under their breath. Why is it there? But something changed very recently. And when you hear what was found, not guessed, not theorized, not imagined, but actually found using technology that would have seemed like sorcery to the very people who built this thing, you're going to feel something shift inside you. Because the truth about Stonehenge is not what any of us were taught. It is not what the textbooks say. And the closer the data gets to the real answer, the more unsettling the picture becomes. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never look at that circle of stones the same way again. Let's go back to the beginning, and not the beginning of Stonehenge itself, we'll get there, but the beginning of how humanity has tried to understand it. For 3 centuries, the greatest minds in archaeology, geology, astronomy, and architecture have pointed every tool they had at Salisbury Plain in southern England. They have dug around those stones, measured them, photographed them, carbon dated them, scanned them from satellites. They have written thousands of academic papers about them. And every single time, the monument gave up just enough to keep researchers hooked and hid just enough to keep them awake at night. The most popular theories over the years range from the reasonable to the extraordinary. Some said it was a burial site. Others called it a solar calendar. A few argued it was a place of healing, a prehistoric Lourdes, where the sick were brought from across Britain to be cured. Some historians pointed to the Druids, though that theory has been largely discredited since Stonehenge predates the Druids by nearly 2,000 years. And then there were the fringe ideas, the ones involving ancient aliens, lost civilizations, and forces we do not understand. Those theories spread because the conventional explanations never quite satisfied the most obvious question. How on earth did people without wheels, without cranes, without iron tools, manage to move stones weighing as much as 25 tons across hundreds of miles of landscape, and then stack them on top of each other with an accuracy that modern engineers still find remarkable? That question has been sitting unanswered for a very long time. And then, in 2024 and 2025 and into 2026, something started to crack open. Researchers began feeding every available dataset about Stonehenge into advanced artificial intelligence systems, including Grok, the AI developed by XAI, and asking it to find patterns that human researchers, limited by their own assumptions and the sheer volume of information, might have missed. What came back was not a single dramatic answer. It was something far more layered, far more strange, and in some ways far more terrifying than a simple solution would have been. Because the AI did not just confirm what we suspected, it mapped the full scale of what we do not yet understand, and that map is enormous. Here is where it gets deeply real. The first thing the data made undeniable, and this is now backed by peer-reviewed science published in some of the most respected journals on Earth, is that the stones of Stonehenge traveled distances that should have been physically impossible for the people who moved them. You have probably heard that some of Stonehenge's stones came from Wales. That part is true. The smaller inner stones, the blue stones, were quarried from the Preseli Hills in Wales, a journey of more than 150 miles to reach Salisbury Plain. Researchers pinpointed the exact quarry sites in 2019. 2 locations called Carn Godog and Craig Rosai Phelan. And when you stand at those quarry sites and then look at where those stones ended up, you begin to feel something that science alone struggles to articulate. This was not a local project. This was not convenience. These people went far out of their way to get specific stones from specific places. And that deliberateness is one of the most important clues in the entire mystery. But then came the finding that genuinely stunned the scientific community. Sitting at the very heart of Stonehenge, flat on the ground at the center of everything, is a stone called the altar stone. It is a 6-ton sandstone slab, 5 meters long, half a meter thick. And for over a century, researchers assumed it came from Wales. It looked like it should come from Wales. The geology seemed consistent. Case closed, or so everyone thought. Then a team of researchers from Curtin University in Australia decided to take a much closer look. They studied the age and chemical composition of minerals locked inside fragments of the altar stone. Tiny crystals that act like geological fingerprints, preserving a record of exactly where a rock formed and when. And what they found in August 2024 rewrote one of archaeology's most confident assumptions. The altar stone did not come from Wales. It came from Scotland. Not just any part of Scotland. It came from the Orcadian Basin in the far northeast of Scotland, a region that includes the tip of the Scottish peninsula and the Orkney Islands. The distance from that origin point to the center of Stonehenge is more than 460 miles, nearly 750 kilometers, and this was 5,000 years ago, before the wheel was widely used in Britain, before boats capable of carrying 6-ton stones had ever been documented, before any form of organized infrastructure connected the British Isles. And yet, that stone is there. It has always been there. And it did not walk. The lead researcher on that study, PhD student Anthony Clark from Curtin's School of Earth and Planetary Sciences, said something that lingered in the minds of everyone who read the paper. He said the findings pointed to unexpectedly advanced transport methods and societal organization, a level of coordination and capability that we simply had not credited to the people of that era. That the movement of this stone from the extreme northeast of Scotland to the middle of southern England required planning, logistics, and social structures that our picture of Neolithic Britain had not accounted for. Think about what that means for a moment. We have been telling a story about who these people were. We have been drawing a picture of primitive societies, of simple tribal groups scraping out an existence before civilization truly began. And right in the middle of Stonehenge, at the literal center of the monument, sits a piece of rock that says that story is wrong, or at least dangerously incomplete. But wait, because the follow-up discovery is where things go from surprising to deeply unsettling. After the altar stone's Scottish origin was confirmed, the same research team turned their attention to the blue stones, all of those smaller inner stones from Wales. The question they asked was not where the stones came from. That had already been established. The question was how they got there, and specifically, a theory had floated around for decades that maybe the stones did not need to be carried at all. Maybe glaciers during the last ice age naturally transported them from Wales and Scotland, depositing them on Salisbury Plain as glacial erratics, essentially pre-positioned building materials that the Neolithic builders simply collected and arranged. It was a seductive theory because it removed the logistical nightmare from the equation. So in January 2026, the Curtin University team tested it. They used advanced mineral fingerprinting, analyzing more than 500 zircon crystals, some of the most durable minerals on Earth, extracted from river sediments near Stonehenge. The logic was precise. If glaciers had carried rocks from Wales or Scotland all the way to Salisbury Plain, those glaciers would have left a clear mineral signature in the local river sands. Rocks erode. Glaciers leave trails. The evidence would be there, preserved in microscopic grains if the theory were true. They found nothing. Not a trace. No glacial mineral signature anywhere near Stonehenge. The study, published in the journal Communications, Earth, and Environment, delivered what one scientist called the strongest evidence yet that people, not glaciers, not accident, not the blind forces of nature, deliberately moved every single stone that makes up Stonehenge, every last one, over distances that stagger the modern imagination. And here is the part that the artificial intelligence analysis highlighted when researchers began cross-referencing all of this data. The logistics of what these Neolithic builders accomplished, the coordinated quarrying, the long-distance transport, the astronomical precision of the final placement, all of it points to something that our current model of prehistoric society cannot fully explain. These were not wandering bands of hunter-gatherers making decisions around campfires. Something was organizing them. Something was directing a project of breathtaking scale and complexity across an entire island, and doing it consistently in phases over more than 1,000 years of construction. Because Stonehenge was not built in a day or a decade or even a century. The monument we see today was built in multiple stages between roughly 3100 BCE and 11500 BCE. The first phase was an earthwork, a circular bank and ditch with 56 pits, known as the Aubrey Holes, arranged around its perimeter. Then came the standing stones in different waves of construction, each phase adding new elements and rearranging others. The project spanned at least 1,000 to 600 years, multiple generations, entire civilizations that rose and fell within the lifespan of this single ongoing construction project. What kind of people sustain a shared vision across 600 years? What kind of cultural memory, what kind of institutional knowledge, what kind of spiritual or political commitment holds a community to a single purpose across 60 or 70 generations? That question does not have a simple answer. And the AI analysis of the archaeological record makes the question louder, not quieter. Now here is where the astronomical dimension enters. And this is the part that researchers are calling genuinely staggering. Everyone knows that Stonehenge is aligned with the summer solstice. On the longest day of the year, the rising sun passes directly over the heel stone and shines straight down the central axis of the monument. That alignment is precise enough to be unmistakable. It is not an approximation or a coincidence. It was engineered. And it required an understanding of solar cycles, of the exact position on the horizon where the sun rises on that specific day, and the mathematical ability to orient a massive stone structure to within a fraction of a degree of that point. That alone should humble us. These are people who built this without calculators, without computers, without anything we would recognize as a scientific instrument. They observed the sky over years, tracked patterns, remembered data across generations, and encoded their knowledge in stone. That is remarkable. But it turns out the sun was only half of the picture. Between 2024 and 2025, something rare happened, something that only occurs once every 18.6 years. It is called a major lunar standstill. During this event, the moon's rise and set positions along the horizon reach their most extreme limits, the farthest north and farthest south they ever go. And researchers from Oxford, Leicester, and Bournemouth universities, working alongside English Heritage and the Royal Astronomical Society, set up a dedicated observation project specifically designed to test whether Stonehenge was built with this lunar event in mind. What they found confirmed a theory that had been circulating for years but never been fully proven. Inside the monument, positioned just inside the outer bank and ditch, are 4 stones known as the station stones. Only 2 of them survive today, but their positions are known. And the long sides of the rectangle they form align precisely with the most southerly moonrise and the most northerly moonset during a major lunar standstill. That alignment is not accidental. It is too precise, too deliberate, too geometrically specific to be coincidence. Professor Michael Parker Pearson from University College London, one of the leading experts on British prehistory, described what this means in terms that should make every person who hears them stop and think. He said that if Stonehenge is aligned with both the sun and the moon, then its builders were, in his words, tying together the movements of the sun and moon in a kind of Neolithic grand unified theory. They were not just tracking the sky, they were attempting to capture the entire cosmos in a single monument. They were building a machine for connecting the human world to the heavens, for mapping time, and perhaps for something much deeper than time. And crucially, the 18.6-year lunar cycle is not obvious. It is not something you notice in a week or a year. To detect the lunar standstill, to understand that it repeats, to measure its extremes, that requires sustained, multi-generational observation. Someone had to watch the moon rise and set every night for decades. Someone had to record what they saw. Someone had to pass that record to the next generation, and the next, and the next, until the pattern became clear. And then someone had to make the decision to encode that pattern into the most permanent structure their civilization could imagine. That is not primitive. That is not the behavior of people we should be looking down at through the condescension of history. That is a scientific tradition. That is systematic inquiry. That is something that looks, from a certain angle, disturbingly like what we call civilization. Now the AI comes back into this story, because when Grok and other advanced AI systems were given the totality of Stonehenge's archaeological and astronomical data, every measurement, every excavation record, every astronomical calculation, every geological finding, and asked to identify patterns and generate questions that human researchers had not yet asked, what emerged was a picture of an ancient world that was far more interconnected, far more sophisticated, and far more organized than our standard historical narrative suggests. The data pointed toward trade networks that spanned the entire British Isles and extended into continental Europe. It identified patterns in the burial practices at Stonehenge, because, make no mistake, this was also a place of the dead, that suggested people were being brought to this site from enormous distances. Isotope analysis of human remains found at Stonehenge has shown that some of the people buried there did not grow up anywhere near Wiltshire. They came from Wales, from Scotland, possibly from mainland Europe. They made a pilgrimage to this place to die, or were carried there after death. That tells you something about what Stonehenge meant to the people who built it. It was not a local landmark. It was a place of cosmic continental significance. The AI analysis also flags something about the societal organization required for this project that mainstream archaeology has been slow to fully reckon with. To quarry stones in Wales and Scotland, transport them hundreds of miles, and assemble them with astronomical precision required not just labor but logistics. It required food supply chains to feed the workers. It required tools being manufactured and distributed. It required leaders, or coordinators, or priests, or engineers, with enough authority to direct thousands of people over hundreds of years. It required, in other words, a level of social complexity that our textbooks have historically attributed to later civilizations. Civilizations with writing, civilizations with metals, civilizations we would call, without hesitation, advanced. And here is where the genuinely terrifying part lives. Not terrifying in a supernatural sense, though we will get to what that word really means here in a moment. Terrifying in the way that true understanding can be terrifying. Because if the people who built Stonehenge had this level of knowledge, this level of organization, this level of astronomical precision, then what else did they know? What other monuments? What other systems of knowledge? What other achievements did they create that simply did not survive? Stone lasts, wood rots, cloth disintegrates, memory fades. What we see at Stonehenge might be the most durable fragment of a much larger world, a world of sophisticated Neolithic civilization that we have barely begun to understand. Professor Parker Pearson put it this way, that the movement of stones across such vast distances, unique among the 900 stone circles in Britain and Ireland, and the fact that so many people were buried at Stonehenge from places far away, suggests this was a monumental attempt to unify people, ancestors, land, and cosmos. A monumental attempt to unify. Think about the scale of that ambition. Not a local temple for a local tribe. A monument designed to gather an entire civilization, to pull people from hundreds of miles in every direction toward a single point where the earth and the sky could meet. And it worked. For centuries, possibly for millennia, it worked. People came. They brought their dead. They stood at the heel stone at midsummer and watched the sun rise exactly where the builders always knew it would rise. They stood in the moonlight during a lunar standstill and saw the moon reach the exact extreme position that their ancestors had encoded into the station stones. They felt what the builders intended them to feel, that they were standing at the center of something, that the cosmos was ordered, that they were not lost in an indifferent universe, but held within a structure that the wisest people of their age had spent lifetimes trying to map. Now here's the question that the AI raised, the one that researchers are genuinely wrestling with right now as of 2026. If this level of knowledge and capability existed 5,000 years ago, why did it apparently not lead directly forward to what we call civilization? Why is there what appears to be a gap, or at least a discontinuity, between the Neolithic world that built Stonehenge and the literate metal, using civilizations that came later, what happened in between, what was lost, and more pressingly, what might still be there, buried under other planes in other countries, waiting for the right technology to find it? Because the recent study on the altar stone's journey opened one more door that nobody had fully walked through yet. Researchers now believe that a glacier may have partially assisted in transporting the altar stone, not all the way to Stonehenge, but partway. Their modeling suggests the glacier could have carried the stone from the Orcadian Basin in northeast Scotland as far as Dogger Bank, a prehistoric landmass that once connected Britain to mainland Europe and is now submerged under the North Sea. This was published in June 2026 in the Journal of Quaternary Science. From Dogger Bank, humans would have taken over, completing the final leg of a journey that combined the raw force of an ice age with the deliberate effort of organized human civilization. That image, a 6-ton stone riding a glacier through an ice age, then being picked up by Neolithic people and carried the rest of the way to the center of a monument they were building to map the sun and moon, is not a small image. It is one of the most extraordinary things that archaeological science has ever described, and the word that the lead researcher used was determination. Transporting a stone of this size over such a long distance would have required planning, coordination, a deep understanding of the landscape, and, he said, tremendous determination. Determination, that is what built Stonehenge. Not alien technology, not supernatural forces, not a mystery that requires us to believe in the impossible. Something far more remarkable than any of that. The determination of human beings, people who had no iron, no writing, no wheel, who looked at the sky for long enough that the sky gave up its secrets, who organized their society around a shared vision of such profound importance that they sustained it for 1,600 years, who moved mountains, literally, because they decided that the center of the world needed to be marked, and they were the ones who were going to mark it. And that is what Grok and all the AI systems that have now processed this data keep returning to. Not a single shocking discovery, not a secret code, not evidence of lost technology or hidden knowledge that overturns everything, but something more unsettling in its own way, the systematic revelation of how much these people actually understood, how capable they actually were, and how dramatically we have underestimated them. Because here is the quiet terror in all of this. We have spent centuries telling ourselves a story in which we are the most advanced humans who ever lived, in which intelligence, sophistication, and capability increase in a straight line from primitive origins to modern civilization. And Stonehenge, the more closely we look at it, keeps pushing back against that story. It keeps suggesting that the line is not straight, that there were peaks in human understanding and social organization that occurred far earlier than we want to admit, that the people who dragged a 6-ton stone 460 miles and placed it at the center of a monument aligned with both the sun and the 18.6-year lunar cycle were not primitives in any meaningful sense of the word. They were people, fully realized, deeply intelligent, cosmically curious human beings who looked at the same sky we look at, asked the same questions we ask, and committed everything they had, their labor, their resources, their social order, their dead, to finding some kind of answer. And they built their answer in stone so it would last, so that even 5,000 years later, even after every civilization that followed them had risen and fallen, even after the wheel and writing and iron and computers and artificial intelligence had all been invented, even after all of that, their answer would still be standing. And we would still be standing in front of it, asking why. That is what the data says. That is what the science says. That is what the mineral fingerprints in 500 zircon crystals say, and the orbital mechanics of the major lunar standstill say, and the geological trace of a 6-ton stone say as it makes its impossible journey from the tip of Scotland to the heart of England. Stonehenge was not built by accident. It was not built by aliens. It was not built by a primitive society stumbling into something they did not understand. It was built by people who understood far more than we gave them credit for. And the more we look, the more we scan, measure, analyze, and ask our most powerful AI systems to find the patterns we have missed, the clearer it becomes that we are not unraveling a mystery. We are recovering a memory of what human beings are capable of when they decide that something matters enough to move mountains for it. And maybe that is the most terrifying thing of all. Not that Stonehenge hides some dark secret, but that it holds up a mirror, and in that mirror, we see people who, with far less than we have, achieved something we still cannot fully explain.